Okay, this is the Chapter 8 lecture on gender and peer relationships, middle childhood through early adolescence. Learning objectives of Chapter 8 describe biological processes in sex determination, differentiation in male and female prenatal development, sex-related vulnerabilities to hereditary diseases and mortality rates, identify and describe key elements that contribute to gender role development, and having examined your own schemas about gender identity, stereotypes, expectations, respond effectively to children's gender-associated needs and problems, and recognize the role, influence, and relevance of peer relationships in childhood and adolescence, analyze children's functioning within their peer groups, and structure interventions that meet needs for acceptance and belonging. So the biology of sex. Chromosomal differences exist between XX and XY zygotes. There's a higher metabolic rate in an XY chromosome pair, and they divide more quickly and have faster prenatal growth. Male and female differentiation begins 5 weeks after conception. There's differentiation into male structures. So the SRY gene begins a cascade of changes that result in male reproductive system and production of male hormones. Without SRY gene and male hormones, female reproductive structures develop. So conception rates, birth rates, current birth ratio is about 105 males to 100 females. There's vulnerability of males that contributes to susceptibility to hereditary diseases. One factor is the Y chromosome is much smaller than the X chromosome. X-linked recessive disorders are more likely in males. An example of a defective alleles for color blindness. So one defective allele means male color blindness, and 2 defective alleles would mean female color blindness. And something to know about that is that males most likely are the most likely to experience color blindness, where females are in the minority for that. And so something I learned in recent years was about color blindness. And so I wanted to include some slides about that. So there are different kinds of color blindness. It's not simply just black and white vision. So normal color vision, you could see the tomatoes and the, maybe it's an oregano leaf. I'm not really sure. I'm not too much of a chef over here, but with the avocado spread on the bread, whatever that is, that's very normal vision versus a deuterium color blindness, protein color blindness, and an achromatopsia color blindness. You can see how the vision is different as a result of color blindness. So this is from an Enchroma website. And so commonly confused colors. So the normal view would be of pink here. Let me zoom in on this actually. So for protein color blindness, we see pink, but protein would see like a grayish purple. Normal vision would see purple, but protein would see this color. We would see red if we've got normal vision, and then they would see this kind of color instead of red. And then for green, they would see this color instead. Interestingly, I have a friend that is colorblind, and bless him, he went and bought some new shorts. He was wanting to buy some khaki shorts, and he was wearing them at work, and somebody made a comment, "Hey man, like your shorts." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And they were like, "You're wearing pink shorts." He's like, "No, I'm not. These are khaki." And he thought he bought khaki shorts, but they were actually a light pink. So that's just an example. So normal color vision versus deuteranomaly color blindness. So you see there's a vast difference between the colors there. And from what I understand, color blindness can be a reason for people not to be able to drive because they can't distinguish between colors of signs and things. So for proto-anomaly color blindness, you see normal vision here, and that's a little bit more brownish, a little more green. And then there's that protein versus normal again, another image. And then interestingly, this is a American Optometric Associations or optometric, I don't know how exactly they say it, that they use this image for determining if people have color blindness. So if you can't see the number in any of these circles, that could be an indicator that you have color blindness of some kind. So 12, 8, 6, 29, 57, 5, 3, 15, 74, 5, 6, 57, 5, 42, and 45. Those are the numbers in each of the circles. So if you can't see any of those numbers, and it's not just a blurry thing, maybe you could see an optometrist and figure out if color blindness is something that you face. I don't have color blindness. That's why I'm able to see all those numbers. But so yeah, it's an interesting image for y'all to see. Okay, so gender role development. So gender development is cognitive, social, and a behavioral phenomena. There are steps in the process of children's gender identity formation. There's a preference for objects associated with their gender by age 2, and they understand gender stability typically by age 3 and 4, whether they're a boy or a girl or what have you, and they recognize gender constancy typically by school age. Social processes can lead to gender labels, or social processes contribute to gender labels being assigned at birth by adults. There is cognition involved in self-labeling as a boy or a girl, and biology gives genitalia and the feeling of being male or female, right? Estrogen versus progesterone versus testosterone. And gender identity is complex for intersex children and for some others. So gender nonconformity in transgender children. So gender dysphoria is extreme distress related to gender. So I really am not a girl. I really am not a boy. That's that extreme distress. And it can manifest with anxiety, depression, self-esteem issues, different things like that. Transgender is biological sex that is incompatible with gender identity. It begins with gender nonconformity. Results of studies show that appearance of these children is more like their expressed gender. They are unlikely to be confused, delayed, or pretending about their gender identity. They face much greater risk of psychological difficulties like depression, anxiety, and suicidality, and they're often victimized by bullies, unfortunately. So here's an interesting image that I found from Harvard that I think is cool. So there's your sex assigned at birth, and then gender identity comes after that. Gender expression is an outer layer of that, and then gender perception, right? So what is the sex you're assigned? What is your identity? How do you express that? And then how do others perceive it? There's multiple layers here to one's gender. And per Harvard Medical School, so pulled this stuff off the Harvard website, sexual orientation. So I think this is just some good stuff to be able to differentiate between as future counselors, right? Knowing what sexual identity versus gender identity is. It's really important to make sure that you're honoring and respecting your client's pronouns or sexuality, preferences, just all those different things. So sexual orientation is how a person defines their physical, emotional, and romantic attachments to other people. The three primary components of sexual orientation are attraction, behavior, and identity, all of which may change over time for some people. Some of the more common sexual orientation identities are lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, and straight, though there are many more. Gender identity is a person's inner sense of being a woman, man, another gender, or having no gender at all. Gender identity does not necessarily align in a traditional sense with the sex a person is assigned at birth, which is typically male or female. Gender identity may also change over time for some people. And sex development. So this is the process by which biological sex characteristics emerge. One example of differences of sex development are intersex conditions in which a person has reproductive or sexual anatomy that differs from traditional definitions of male or female. So in an example of that would be like a hermaphrodite, where they're born with both vagina and penis. The term lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex, LGBTQI+, refers to some of the minority identities and communities that exist related to sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex development. The plus refers to the existence of many additional identities. Some people identify with multiple terms within the category. For example, for sexual orientation, bisexual, and queer. All people have a sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex development. This guide is to help you talk to your patients about theirs. So per Harvard Medical School, these are some descriptors for different sexual orientations. So I'll zoom in a little bit here. For lesbian, this describes trans or cis women who are primarily attracted to trans or cis women, often referred to as homosexual, though this term is no longer used by many in the community. Gay describes trans or cis men who are primarily attracted to trans or cis men, although I've had women that identify as gay instead of lesbian. Also used and embraced by people with other gender identities to describe same gender attractions and relationships, often referred to as homosexual, though this term is no longer used. Bisexual describes people who are attracted to people of their own gender as well as other genders or to multiple genders that may be different from their own, sometimes shortened to bi or bi plus. Asexual describes people who experience little or no sexual attraction to others. Asexual people may still experience emotional or romantic attractions, and some may still engage in sexual activity, sometimes shortened to ace. Pansexual describes people who are attracted to people of all gender identities and expressions, or whose attractions are not related to other people's gender. Although some people may identify as both pansexual and bisexual, someone may identify more with one of these sexual orientations than the other. Queers, the definition is describes people who think of their sexual orientation or gender identity as outside of societal norms, so not straight or cisgender. Some people view the term queer as more fluid and inclusive than traditional identities. Although queer was historically used as a slur, it has been reclaimed by many in the LGBTQIA+ as a term of empowerment. And straight describes a trans or cis man or trans or cis woman who is primarily attracted to people of the other binary gender than themselves, often referred to as heterosexual. And just something that is useful to know. So in my experiences in counseling with clients, I've had clients that knew since they were 5 or knew since they were 8 or knew that since some age, a young age, that they were gay, that they were bi, that they were lesbian, that they had this gender identity or this sexual orientation, excuse me. And I've also had some clients that an unfortunate series of events through trauma involving the opposite sex found themselves to have a sexual orientation of the same sex because of abuses committed against them by the opposite sex. So I'm thinking of one particular client that, as a way to survive childhood physical abuse from father and brother, decided to become more masculine as a way to survive the environment. And it led to developing attachments mostly only with women and being attracted only to women. And it was a sexual orientation that was very much influenced by trauma. So while some clients can absolutely know since they were young that that is what their sexual orientation is, some clients can have a trauma-related sexual orientation that they have formed. So you want to tread lightly with the way that you talk about that with clients, because I've had some clients where I start to have that conversation and inquire about whether it was something they always knew or if there's something that happened. And I had a client, I was very much so tiptoeing and trying to be sensitive, and they took it very offensively that I was asking, how could you even think that that's what happened to me? And I said, no, I wasn't assuming. I was simply just asking because I've had other clients that had this experience. And she was like, oh, okay. Well, no, that didn't happen to me. I've just known since I was young. And so you do want to be really mindful, because the climate for talking about sexual orientation, it can be a little bit sensitive. And so you just want to be really mindful of that when you're talking to clients about that topic of sexual orientation. And here's an image that I found online of different gender identities that exist with different symbols. So, you know, the plus and LGBTQI plus, right? It's talking about these different things, like, right, what are these different types of genders? And I would need to go and double, triple check that all of these things are actually accurate. There were some other ones that absolutely had things that did not sound like real genders, but this one, looking at all the different identities, looked the most accurate for other scenes or other images that I saw. So it's just going to show that gender isn't just binary. That's not the way that people identify. And so you want to be paying attention to this question when you're working with clients. You can use appropriate pronouns and respect your client and do no harm per the ACA Code of Ethics, which is so important. So gender and behavior. So gender stereotypes based on perception of major differences in distribution of personality traits between the sexes. Gender differences in behavior, personality, and preference do exist. Results of meta-analysis show that some traits vary between males and females. There's table 8.1 in your text that you can check out. Historical changes in gender differences include decreasing differences in math problem solving, and stereotypical differences that are not found, that females are more social dependent, pro-social, and males are more competent at analytical tasks. So not stereotypical things that were found. And then males and females do spend their time differently. And average male and female differences are usually quite small. So role of biology and gender differences. So prenatal release of masculinizing hormones is something that takes place. Girls with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH, are overexposed to prenatal androgens. Behavioral changes in puberty are due to hormonal differences in male versus female biology, and also differences in brain structures can occur, do occur. Some relate to the male-female behavior differences and others do not. No differences in intelligence necessarily. Men and women achieve similar IQ results with different brain regions. Role of cognition in generating gender differences. So cognitive developmental theories show that intrinsic motivation in children to acquire gender appropriate behavior is a process of self-socialization, and less stereotypical thinking is occurring after children achieve gender constancy, which is where they have a consistent gender identity. So gender schemas include expectations and beliefs about male and female characteristics, and gender schemas affect behaviors. Quick moment of education. Schemas. What are schemas? Schemas are the innermost held beliefs about who we are, our views of the world, of ourselves, of others. And so if a schema about gender exists, it's their view of gender, right? How do they look at gender? What is their worldview of gender? And so that would affect behaviors that one takes if they have certain views about gender, schemas, if you will. Children's, and education moment, this is all educational. Children's knowledge of gender stereotypes. They have awareness that is apparent by age 3, and they are quite sexist at age 4. There is extensive knowledge by the school age, and it does not ensure conformity. Role of parenting in generating gender differences. So Freud's psychoanalytic theory of gender roles based on sexual desire, competition, and fear in young children. Identification with or imitation of the same-sex parent. And this theory has not been validated by current research. Social learning theories show that parents and other adults influence gender-typed behaviors. There's an assumption that parents teach children to adopt gendered behaviors through their rewards and punishments. And there are differences in the ways that parents treat boys and girls. They socialize them to handle conflict differently, and cultural differences exist in adult gender-typed attitudes. This is absolutely true. I remember walking down the sidewalk one time, and I think it was a mom and a dad, were holding the hands of their, what looked like twins. It was a boy and a girl, they're fraternal twins. And they were walking and they both tripped and fell at the same time. And mom cuddled with the girl, or not coddled, what's the word I'm looking for, comforted the daughter, and the dad comforted the son. And mom's like, oh, sweetie, come here. It's okay. We're going to be okay. It's all right. You just fell down. It's all right. And dads are there. Oh, son, you're fine. It's just, you just fell down. Just wipe it off. You're good. You can see the difference starting even from when they're little toddlers, right? Or even from when they're babies, dressing them in pink and blue, and all those kinds of things. So absolutely, parents will treat boys and girls differently, or have a propensity to, just based on gender roles and stereotypes. So role of peer interactions in generating gender differences. Children's time is spent in gender segregated peer groups often. There's a social dosage effect. So more time that's spent in the same gender groups is equal to more gender typed behavior. versus if they develop different interaction styles, and that creates difficulties in mixed gender interactions. Or not versus, but they develop different interaction styles that create difficulties in mixed gender interactions. So because they've got more male interaction styles or more female, they may have difficulty when they interact with opposite gender. There's less turn taking by males, which can lead to a greater tendency to express agreement with others among women. And Gilligan's concept of females losing their voice in adolescence is not supported with evidence. There's an indication of different disclosure styles, which may make girls or women less powerful agents when interacting with males. Multidimensional theory of gender differences in behavior. So the multidimensional views combine biology, cognitive processes, and parent and peer socialization influences. Bussey and Bandura have social cognitive theory. They specify 3 categories of variables: personal, behavioral, and environmental influences interacting reciprocally. They emphasize social, especially parental and cognitive factors. Socialization is embedded in the cultural context, and an example is the extent to which a society's attitudes and institutions are egalitarian or equal. Future research is suggested to look at the integration of findings on peers' power to affect gendered behavior. So this is Bandura's model of triadic reciprocal determinism. And so it was talking about Bandura's social cognitive theory, and that's what this is about. So looking at a behavior, the environment, and a person, these things interplay off of each other. So the person has internal competencies, cognitive, emotional, and physical, and then their behavior involves actions and decision-making, and the environment is external, involving spaces, laws, objects, things, right? And they have an interplay off of each other where they influence one another, right? So here's another view. So the environment, personal, and behavioral. So the environmental involves social norms, access in the community, and influence on others. The personal has to do with knowledge, expectations, and attitudes. And the behavioral has to do with skills, practice, and self-efficacy. And human behavior is determined by these factors. All right. So peer relationships. Longitudinal study links adults on psychiatric registry with nominations by grade school peers to fill negative roles. Predictive accuracy of young peers is more accurate than tests of intelligence, personality, achievement, and other measures. Factors affect peer relationships and peer group acceptance. Social competence and having good social skills affect your peer group acceptance and your peer relationships, and peer group membership and opportunities to practice communication, conflict resolution, joint goal setting, and more also affect your relationships and group acceptance. So measurement of individuals within the peer group. So there's 2 methods of analysis. One is analysis of individual group members' characteristics, and 2 is analysis of the different groups that exist. Sociometry is the measure of a child's status in peer groups, and it uses children's nomination of peers to evaluate peer status. Nominations to be class leader, class villain, and other roles, social preference score, number of nominations, positive and negative, that the child receives from peers, and social impact is the sum of positive and negative nominations, showing how much child is noticed by peers. And these are interesting and important things to recognize whenever you're working with children that might be struggling with bullying or being bullied or not making friends or feeling like they don't fit in. You know, you want to look at how are they measuring their status in their peer groups? What is it measured by, right? And helping them figure out ways to better fit in or find more friends. So sociometric categories, popular involves many positive and few negative nominations. Average is having average number of positives and negatives. Neglected involves few nominations, low social impact. Rejected is many negative, few positive nominations. They're typically disliked and there's low preference for these persons. And then controversial is many positive, many negative, and characteristics of both popular and rejected children. They may be seen as aggressive or as class leaders. So here is an image that reflects these different things from the last slide. Right, so you see the social preference and the impact, right? So Social acceptance is indicated by like most nominations, and then social rejection as indicated by like least nominations. So many like least nominations and few social acceptance votes rejected, right? So you see how that image works. Way to remember those. Average is in the middle of all of them, right? And you could even use this as an educational piece with clients that you're working with. Where do you feel that you fit on this image, right? Individual characteristics related to sociometric status. So popular involves perspective taking skills. They're cooperative. They can be assertive and they're not antagonistic or disruptive. They have high self-regulation, which is self-control. They're good at problem solving, social problem solving. The rejected aggressive person is high in instrumental aggression. They're low in perspective taking, self-control, and social interaction skills. They commonly exhibit hostile attributional bias and this predicts later bullying. The rejected withdrawn child is socially anxious and inappropriate. They have poor perspective taking skills. They're socially inept and they're often ostracized. The neglected child is low in peer interactions. They usually have a best friend, and average, there's moderate social competence and no problematic outcomes. So gender and cultural differences in sociometric classifications. So there's greater intolerance of male gender nonconforming behavior. So masculine behavior in girls is more accepted by peers than is femininity in boys. Norms in China, shyness and social anxiety are more acceptable there. And isolation is given to aggressive children. Children's aggressive behavior is universally seen as a problem. Individualistic societies encourage children to defend themselves, which would be here in America, United States. And collectivist societies expect the group to establish harmony. So it's more about the group. And if anybody watching this has listened to previous lecture, we talked about Eastern versus Western culture parenting styles, right? So the group versus the individual being valued. And then it's important for helping professionals to recognize cultural differences. You want to pay attention to the culture once again. So the stability of sociometric categories and outcomes, the most extreme categories are popular and rejected, and they're most stable. Peer acceptance is linked to a myriad of positive outcomes psychologically and academically. Poor outcomes are shown for rejected aggressive children and for rejected withdrawn children. For rejected aggressive children, they have poor academic records, they repeat grades, frequently are absent, they have a risk for dropping out, they have a heightened rate of criminal activity and drug use. And then for rejected withdrawn children, they have evidence for later internalizing of issues, which means they hold it in, keep it in, or they blame themselves potentially for things that aren't their fault, and that can lead to depression and loneliness. Measurement of the peer group. So another level of analysis. So cliques and crowds, like-minded children, specific set of norms. They dress a certain way. They have certain behaviors, jocks, the brains, and others, band people, whatever. It's significant in late childhood and early adolescence. Crowds are larger collectives of multiple cliques, so peer cultures. Analysis involves mapping of the clique or crowd social structures, and formation of cliques is based on two forces: the need to establish identity and the need for approval and belonging. Membership is based on social comparison and is intrinsically motivated to conform. Peer groups have influence on behavior, so homogeneity within cliques, homophily in behavior and attitudes. Membership is based on processes of influence and selection. So peer group influences, the peer group influences conformity to group norms through normative social processes, not coercion. Group selection is based on individual choice to affiliate. Both processes contribute to peer group formation and maintenance. They spend more time together as they mature into adolescence, and peer network factors into conceptualization of individual problems and structuring of interventions. And the final slide. So good peer relationships are a powerful protective factor for clients. Problematic peer relationships have risks. They elicit and can maintain maladaptive behaviors, and they deprive children of protective effects So if they're constantly around peers that are getting in trouble, going to the principal's office, birds of a feather flock together. You become the people you spend your time with. So you want to be mindful of that when working with teenagers that have substance use issues, or even adults, honestly. Who are the people that you're spending your time around, because you're going to adopt their characteristics. Anybody watching, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where maybe you didn't drink, or maybe you didn't smoke, or maybe you didn't use that drug, but because everybody else in the room was, maybe you didn't start using it at first, but over time you did. You eventually at least tried it because it was part of that environment. It wasn't something you chose. Or even maybe a simpler example, maybe some of you guys aren't really big on cussing, using curse words, but you started spending time around people that did. Over time, you notice that you maybe started cussing a little bit more. Usually that can happen because that social impact. So problematic peer relationships, want to pay attention to those. They influence the child's development, what they choose to do and not to do. Want to pay attention to that. It's important to understand rejection profiles to tailor interventions, assess with peer and teacher behavior ratings and observations, emphasize social competence rather than single skills. You want to target peer rejected children and that child's peer group. You want to use direct interventions to multiple targets simultaneously if possible. And you want to avoid stereotypes and recognize aggression in girls as well as boys, and the expression of emotions in boys as well as girls. As I think I previously said, emotions are not good or bad. They just are. We're just socialized to be more acceptably emotional as women than boys are. Oh, suck it up, rub some dirt in it, pull the boots up by the bootstraps. I think fortunately that is kind of something that is more of like my parents' generation, being in their 60s now. Like that's more of the parenting that they got from their parents. I didn't get a lot of that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't still exist. I think it's a lot more minimal than it used to be. That's not to say it's not still a significant issue. Definitely get into toxic masculinity, that concept and that topic. I know it's a very what's the word I want to use, controversial topic, but absolutely there can be toxic masculinity traits that people get enforced and shoved down their throats. There can be toxic feminine traits that can be shoved down your throats, but perhaps save that for another conversation in one of these lectures if it becomes relevant. So yes, you want to avoid stereotypes and let your clients explain to you what their peer identity is, what is their relationship with their peers, and what is important to them socially, because they'll tell you if you build the rapport and you listen. Okay, so that's the end of the slides, and now time for chapter 8 questions. First question, what is the birth ratio of males to females? Equal, 105 to 100, 110 to 100, or 4 to 5? B, 105 to 100. What is the sex chromosome configuration for children who have the condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, CAH? YY, XY, XX, or XXY? XX. Based on many meta-analyses that assess the effects of sex differences, which of the following real sex differences in traits or qualities applies to boys more than girls? Collaborative discourse style, verbal achievement involving reading, spelling, language tests, satisfaction with one's gender assignment, or preference for gender-typed toys? Satisfaction with one's gender assignment. So that's to say, boys are more likely to be satisfied with gender assignment. At puberty, hormonal changes and hormonal differences between boys and girls may cause some behavioral differences that emerge at about that time. Which of the following behavior changes is seen more in girls than in boys? Greater increase in depressive symptoms, aggressive behavior, delinquent behavior, or dominance seeking? Depressive symptoms. Using sociometric techniques to define a child's social status, how is an individual's social impact computed? adding positive nominations awarded by peers, combining positive and negative nominations by peers, adding negative nominations awarded by peers, and subtracting negative nominations from positive nominations by peers. D. Which one is used for sociometric technique of social impact computation? B, combining positive and negative nominations by peers. Tiffany is 3 years old. She knows that she is a girl and she expects to be a girl tomorrow, but she does not understand that her gender is permanent. She believes that cutting her hair short could change her gender. Tiffany has blank, but not blank. Gender constancy, but not gender stability. Gender stability, but not gender constancy. Gender constancy, but not gender identity. Gender identity, but not gender stability. And that's supposed to be a D. I don't know why it marked it as a C. A, B, C, or D. B, gender stability / gender constancy. Okay. Research indicates that mothers talk more to girls, that parents talk more about emotions to girls, that parents put more pressure on boys to suppress crying, and that teachers are more disapproving of girls than of boys when they are highly active. Which of the following theories argues that these modeling and rewarding processes are the most important influences on sex differences in behavior? Information processing theories, psychoanalytic Freudian theories, social learning theories, or behavioral genetics theories? Social learning theories. And last question. Counselors need to recognize that girls' antisocial behavior in late childhood is likely to include non-confrontational, relational, and aggressive behaviors, has not been linked to later anxiety and depression, is unlikely to have long-term and negative consequences, and is a result of particular challenges faced by girls. A, B, C, or D? A is likely to include non-confrontational, relational, aggressive behaviors. All right, so some questions for y'all to answer in the comments. So one or two, one or both actually. How do you think you could use this information for counseling clients struggling to make friends or that are experiencing bullying? And two, in social cognitive theory, do you think that environmental, personal, or behavioral factors are any more influential than the other factors? Why or why not? Feel free to leave your answers in the comments below. And that is all I have for the Chapter 8 PowerPoint slide. And thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or night. Have a good one.